In the shadow of escalating threats, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov hurled a dire warning: continued Western aid to Ukraine could ignite World War III. This came just one day after U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Zelensky in Kiev. The intent was crystal clear: cease supporting Ukraine, or face the abyss. Yet the West pressed on, undeterred, flooding aid despite the looming specter of global conflict. Picture the charged air of June 2022. Just 2 months into the invasion, for nuclear threats already hung over the world like a thickening fog. Tension crackled with each announcement, the metallic scent of fear mingling with the hum of diplomatic wires. Enter the so-called red line over MHHIMARES, those high-mobility artillery rocket systems. The Biden administration debated fiercely, providing them would be an unpardonable spark. Russian officials amplified the alarm, vowing catastrophic fallout. But what if I told you Ukraine's triumphs in April and May flipped the script entirely? Key victories turned those MHHIMARES from taboo to essential. Suddenly, the U.S. shipped them. Russia watched, silent and powerless. NATO grasped the truth: Russia's red lines bent like straw in the wind, infinitely malleable. Flash forward to July 2022 and March 2023. The former president, Dmitry Medvedev, dropped 2 bombshells. He vowed Judgment Day for any Ukrainian strike on Crimea, Russia's newly claimed prize, wielding any weapon imaginable, implying nuclear devastation. Did the first outburst even register, echoing faintly in Ukraine and NATO halls? Ukraine, defiant, rolled out long-range drones, targeting the Kerch Bridge and its veins, metal groaning under impacts. Undeterred, Medvedev doubled down, his threats bouncing off like pebbles. Was his bark worse than his bite, or just the rambling of a fading empire? Then came September 21, 2022. Putin roared into microphones about partial mobilization. He swore, with breathless urgency, that threats to Russia's territorial integrity demanded every weapon we possess. This isn't mere bluffery. Yet Ukraine's drones pierced Russian airspace, buzzing like angry hornets, striking with precise stings. Where were the nuclear horrors? Hidden away, it seemed. That same month, Putin annexed Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. These territories? Barely under Russian boot, yet stamped as sacred soil. The unspoken terror loomed: attack us, and nuclear fury follows. Ukraine scoffed, liberating Kherson by November, hurling invaders across the Dnipro River in a muddy rout. As Russian troops fled in panic, boots splashing through icy waters, Moscow countered with shrill threats, escalating to farce. What twisted game was Russia playing now? Was this the peak of desperation, or just another hollow roar before the inevitable fall? As threats mounted, the air grew heavier. Ukraine had just reclaimed Kherson city by November, pushing Russian forces back across the Dnipro River. In a panic, Russia escalated threats as their soldiers fled in chaos. February 2023. Germany boldly announced sending Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Putin had warned against this directly, threatening nuclear retaliation. The tanks trickled in from Germany over 2 years. Never enough to make a real difference. Yet another of those so-called red lines crossed by NATO, with zero real consequences. June 2023. Putin revealed relocating tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus, meant to send shivers down Western spines. It fizzled as a meaningless gesture. Russia already hoarded arsenals in Kaliningrad, closer to European hearts and Russian soil. Can you imagine the dread that never materialized? What if these empty bravado tactics are just a mask for weakness? February 2024. Putin menaced that any NATO nation deploying troops in Ukraine would trigger nuclear doom. French President Emmanuel Macron replied he wouldn't rule out Europeans on the ground. Putin barked orders for nuclear drills. Yet NATO held back. Ukraine stood firm on its own merits, bolstered by local resourcefulness and clever drone innovations. August 2024. Ukraine stormed Kursk and struck other Russian lands. Putin's old red line claimed NATO aid turning Ukraine's aims into a war with Russia. No formal declaration followed. Russia struggled 6 months to crush the incursion. Ukraine clinched this solo triumph, pushing then-President Biden to greenlight long-range ITYSIMS missiles hitting Russian targets in November 2024. Putin's comeback felt laughably scripted. He rushed a revised nuclear doctrine that week, dropping barriers for nuclear strikes. Picture the stench of defeat in Moscow's halls. The taste of bitter humiliation as threats crumbled again. What dark secret does this pattern hide? Could Russia's empire be crumbling under its own illusions? And what unexpected reversal awaits next? This text continues from where Putin's predictable nuclear doctrine update followed Ukraine's bold Kursk incursion, lowering his nuclear threshold in a desperate bid for leverage. What if I told you Vladimir Putin's so-called invincible weapons are just theatrical props, hiding a crumbling empire? Remember the stench of fear in that Moscow press room on November 19, 2024, when Ukraine's ATACMS missiles screamed through the air, slamming into a Russian military base in the Bryansk region? The ground trembled under the impact, dust choking the air as alarms blared. Yet, amid the chaos, Putin pretended his new doctrine would unleash hellfire for any backed attack. Why bother with hollow words when reality showed nothing but silence? Imagine the smoky aftermath, helicopters' rotors whining in panic as Ukrainian defenders blasted them from the sky back on February 24, 2022. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed across the airfield, blood-soaking cold concrete under a gray dawn sky. That disastrous sortie exposed Russia's rigid plans, a sign of deeper failures to come. Flashback ends. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov called Ukraine's strike a Western declaration of war. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov barked warnings of nuclear revenge. But guess what? Absolute emptiness followed. Russia fired an Rs-26 Rubesh missile instead, an intermediate-range beast capable of nuclear payloads, but loaded it with conventional explosives. A display of muscle? Or a clown show of restraint? This nuclear theater choreographed every threat without real follow-through. Who knew Putin's red lines were as flimsy as faded chalk? Perched on the edge of this revelation, what if Ukraine's next audacious move exposed Russia's bluff once and for all? Continuing from Ukraine's daring Bryansk facility strike, where Russia's nuclear warnings fizzled into conventional missile shows, the cycle of threats escalated further. Picture the icy grip of November 21, 2024, when British Storm Shadow missiles pierced the sky, humming toward Russian targets with deadly precision. The hell of engines, the earth-shattering booms, they ignited fury in the Kremlin. Russia's ambassador to the UK shrieked that Britain had crossed into outright war. Again, the nuclear threshold allegedly teetered. Again, nothing erupted. Why these empty roars? Because Putin's arsenal is all smoke and no fire, a farce he's paraded for years. How pathetic is a global bully reduced to impotent gestures? As 2025 dawned, Russia ramped up its threat barrage, flaunting mythical missiles like Buran weapons. The wind howled through parades of supposed perfection. But these boasts mask utter desperation. What outdated military dogma can't survive? Stay tuned, for unraveling Putin's facade reveals battles won not by brute force, but by sheer strategic ruin. Picking up from the avalanche of Russian nuclear posturing in 2025, with threats about unbeatable systems hiding a leader trapped in failure, the truth dives into Russia's catastrophic missteps. Consider Russia's starting stance, overwhelming numbers, roaring factories, the shock of surprise. 3 agonizing years on, they've scraped just 1% more Ukrainian soil, paying with 1.4 million shattered lives, a wrecked economy, and worldwide scorn. The tactile sting of frostbite on fingers gripping useless rifles, mud clinging like blood in trenches, deafened by distant artillery thuds. Why can't Russian troops adapt mid-battle? Rigid scripts doom them, unlike NATO's fluid genius. Officers frozen in command, unable to pivot. Ukraine exploited this flaw repeatedly, turning predicable blunders into masterful defeats. Is this the endgame for a superpower crumbling from within? In the shadows of a crumbling empire, Russia's military rigidity shatters under pressure. Predictable tactics exploited time and again by resilient defenders. Now, dive into the catastrophic blunders that exposed a superpower's fatal flaws. Imagine the thunderous roar of rotors slicing through the dawn air, the acrid stench of burning fuel wafting over a misty airfield on day one. What if I told you Russia's flashy invasion unraveled before it even took off, humiliating a tyrant who thought victory was guaranteed? Picture this, February 24, 2022, as Putin unleashed his special military operation, dreaming of a swift takeover. Did he really send 200 to 300 elite special operation troops via helicopters to capture Hostomel Airport, a vital airfield just outside Kiev, all to flood in reinforcements and march straight to the capital? Yes, and it was a disaster. Ukrainian defenders, with hearts pounding from the deafening gunfire and exhaust fumes clinging to their uniforms, shot down 4 helicopters in a burst of fiery defiance. They blocked the runways with sheer grit, forcing the entire assault to crumble. In the distance, 18 transport planes loomed on radar, crammed with up to 4,000 troops eager for battle. But they turned back, rather than dare landing under that relentless barrage. The metallic tang of chaos hung in the air, a shocking surrender that ripped apart illusions of invincibility, leaving Putin exposed as a leader blindsided by his own hubris. What deeper rot did this reveal? Paused for breath. Russia's entire assault wasn't crafted by seasoned generals, but by the FSB. The secretive security services. They gambled on Ukraine folding within just 10 days, feeding tales of easy conquest. Astonishingly, Russian forces arrived with no spare parts for prolonged fights. Their captured maps showed zero contingency for any real resistance. Putin himself fueled this catastrophe over 20 agonizing years, dismantling sources of truthful intel. He insulated himself with sycophants who echoed delusions instead of harsh realities. When the FSB pieced together Ukraine reports, they twisted facts to align with Putin's fantasies, painting Ukrainians as welcoming liberators, the West as indifferent weaklings, and Ukraine itself as a fake nation fated to submit. Without checks, Russia now adheres to plans that defy survival. The regime crushed dissent for control, but that same silence paralyzed adaptation in the brutal face of failure. So Putin clutches his nuclear threats like a lifeline, unable to confess that this war was a colossal misstep. Admitting that would shatter his ego, a truth his brittle system rejects outright. Can Russia win the old-fashioned way? Paused. Its military, hamstrung by NATO-shadowed Ukrainians, has faltered spectacularly against a smaller, smarter force. Negotiation is laughable too, as Russia hemorrhages land in fierce counteroffensives. The twist? These repeated blunders spotlight a ruler whose arrogance birthed his doom, and now, nuclear posturing masks a crumbling legacy. But will the world keep calling his bluff, or will one whispered threat ignite uncontrollable flames? Picture this, a once mighty empire crumbling under its own weight. Russia's early war plans shattered like glass on concrete, their rigid tactics unable to bend against Ukraine's fierce defense. Soldiers flee in panic, soil churning under boots, the acrid stench of gunpowder clinging to the air. Russia can't claim victory through force alone. Their troops, bogged down in muddy trenches, are being pushed back. Territory slips away like sand through fingers. Putin fumes in his fortress, but he can't bully peace from strength. Negotiation? Forget it. He's losing ground, and it's humiliating. Now, imagine a cornered gangster, flashing a rusty gun, pretending it's loaded. That's Putin, a geopolitical tough guy, hiding weakness behind nuclear nightmares. English financier Bill Browder nailed it. Putin acts like the thug in prison, lashing out because his muscle deserted him. His army's strength? Just a facade for eroding might. Every boast masks deep insecurity, the kind that rattles bones in a storm. Nuclear threats are Putin's final, desperate weapon. They pulse through his speeches like heartbeats in a dying man. But what are their true aims? Not to win wars, but to salvage his crumbling throne. First, they divert eyes from battlefield disasters. Smell that defeat, sweat-soaked uniforms, the crunch of failed offensives. When Russia stumbles, say, failing to crush Pokrovsk, Putin unveils a missile that coincidentally could level whole cities. It's sleight of hand, pure distraction. Feel the tension? That's where the second goal bites, scaring risk-averse Western leaders with atomic shadows. Elected officials tremble, fearing voter storms over looming doom. Does this push them to withhold aid from Ukraine? To block those crucial arms packages? The irony stings like a winter gale. In 2025, as Europe unites, sharing burdens, standing firm against the cold wind of threats, the tactic falters. Third, Russian state media blasts these threats like trumpets in a parade. The air buzzes with propaganda glory. Patriots gobble it up, seeing Putin as an unyielding shield against Western aggression. Who cares about real battles? These words paint a superhero tale, ignoring the bloodied reality, a military in disarray, incapable against a smaller, NATO-honed foe. Lastly, Putin's inner circle, spy chiefs, generals, billionaires, needs to believe he's unbeatable. They huddle in opulent rooms, the scent of fear mingling with luxury. Nuclear bluffs feed their loyalty, whispering that Russia still holds aces, even as conventional hopes vanish into Ukrainian counteroffensives. The Atlantic Council summed it up sharp: these threats keep his court in line, a fragile illusion in a game slipping away. But here's the shocking twist: underneath, it's all show. Putin humbles himself with every empty boast, revealing vulnerabilities ripe for exposure. His red lines? Mere chalk on crumbling walls. Can he sustain this charade? Or will the world watch him unravel, alone in the echo of his own hubris? The plot thickens when we peek at his secret fears, vices clawing at his control. The air grows heavy with betrayal whispers. Is his grip slipping because of hidden scandals? Friends turning foes? As his empire fractures. One question hangs: what forbidden truths lurk in Putin's shadows? Will allies desert him in the dark? In the shadow of crumbling power, Vladimir Putin unleashes nuclear threats not just to the world, but to his inner circle, security forces, military leaders, and oligarchs clinging to the illusion of victory. These boasts mask Russia's slipping grip on the war, proving to the Atlantic Council that a terrified leader might drag the globe into annihilation to avoid his own downfall. Picture this: a ruthless gangster in the dead of night, his empire crumbling, yet he snarls threats through gritted teeth, hoping to scare away rivals without pulling the trigger. That's Putin today, Vladimir Putin, the geopolitical thug, once compared by British financier Bill Browder to the prison yard bully, the savage king of intimidation who hides his weakening fists behind a veil of terror. Like a mob boss whose muscle has deserted him, Putin puffs up his chest, brandishing a reputation as a weapon when his actual strength fades into dust. But hold on, does this desperate charade fool anyone? The deafening silence of unfulfilled promises echoes through the corridors of power. Smell the acrid smoke of failed tactics, feel the cold sweat of fear from men who know the bluff's hollow core. What's stopping this cornered wolf from biting and unleashing the ultimate doom? Why hasn't he crossed the red line he paints so vividly? The truth surges like a tidal wave, even Putin grasps the sheer madness of it. Imagine, for a heartbeat of horror, Russia detonating a single 10-kiloton tactical nuke over Ukraine, a blast that vaporizes everything within half a mile in an instant. Take Zaporizhzhia. A city throbbing with 700,000 souls, it's erased, a ghost town amid swirling ash and screams that pierce the air. Detectors shriek across Europe, sirens wailing like beasts unleashed. Communication lines hum with frantic whispers, Kiev to Washington, Paris to Berlin, as leaders choke on the realization, Russia's crossed the forbidden threshold. NATO couldn't ignore it, they'd have no choice but to strike back, not craving Armageddon, but defending the fragile dam of nuclear restraint built over 80 years. Why? Because once you pardon one nuclear slap, the next strike comes faster, maybe aimed at you, shattering the world into chaos. This is escalate to de-escalate in cold military jargon, simple human logic: allow one nuke, and soon everyone plays with fire. NATO's response? Shattering blows to Russian forces in Ukraine. Perhaps tactical nukes scorching their bases, the earth trembling underfoot, radiating heat that chars the sky. Or worse, declaring total war on Russia, dragging empires into a maelstrom of flames and fallout. Putin's mask slips, his threats humiliate him, exposing a leader too cowardly to follow through, his bluff crumbling like brittle bones. Can he keep pretending forever? Or will the world finally call his hand, twisting the game into a dagger pointed right at his throne? The air thickens with unspoken dread. What catastrophic twist awaits if Putin dares toy with mutual destruction, pulling the trigger on his final, suicidal gamble? Imagine the unthinkable. If Vladimir Putin, cornered and desperate, unleashes nuclear hell on Earth, dragging everyone into oblivion, what horrifying end awaits us all? That's the chilling reality as tensions boil, where one man's gamble could shatter billions. Picture the scene, sirens wailing through icy Moscow streets, the acrid bite of fear lingering in the air, as a fractured leader clutches his final card. Flashback to February 24, 2022, the day invasion sirens pierced the dawn, cold wind whipping at soldier boots planted on frozen Ukrainian soil, the distant rumble of explosions echoing like thunder, promising chaos that would ripple forever. In that memory, the chill of defeat already nipped at heels, foreshadowing the abyss ahead. Now, envision the devastation. Putin, regime crumbling from defeat's edge, decides to ignite the end, authorize total nuclear carnage, pulling the world into fiery reciprocal madness. Imagine the skies erupting in chaos. Within 60 agonizing minutes, hundreds of warheads soar, launched and mirrored in furious response. Cities vanish in blinding fury. The air thick with crackling energy, blossoming mushroom clouds painting apocalyptic sunrises. Russia, the United States, Europe, obliterated in instant infernos. Hours later, the toll mounts. Tens of millions perish from the raw blast force, the ground vibrating under collapsing structures. Sensory horrors unfold, the bitter sting of dust-choking lungs, cries muffled by swirling ash. Radiation creeps inward, a silent poison seeping through skin, turning victory celebrations into graveyards. Days stretch horrors longer. Death spiraling higher as sickness poisons survivors, invisible waves of nausea and decay spreading like wildfire. Uncontrolled blazes ravage skeletal ruins, acrid smoke curling with the metallic tang of melted steel. You feel it, the oppressive heat on your face, the distant crackle of flame eating through what was once home. Weeks bring doom. 150 million tons of soot and debris punch into the stratosphere, birthing endless nuclear winter. Shadows lengthen eternally. 6 months pass, temperature plummeting sharply. Crops wither in silent betrayal, soil cracking under untamed frosts. Famished fields whisper of famine's approach. 2 years in, a savage drop of 14 degrees Celsius grips the planet. Agriculture crumbles globally, farms turning to lifeless wastelands with the bitter taste of failure hanging heavy. A decade later, unimaginable loss, an estimated 5 billion dead, not from the blasts, but starvation's merciless grip. Civilization reduced to rubble, societies shattered like fragile glass. Remnants wander a poisoned world, regions walled off by lethal radiation. Generations cursed, faces etched with the tactile scar of contaminated earth, rough, unyielding, forbidding life itself. Survivors huddle in dim shelters, the faint odor of decay ever present, a constant reminder of what one desperate act unleashed. Why would Putin even consider this madness? Is he truly reckless enough to pull the trigger? Deep down, no, he craves victory, not annihilation. He dreams of Russia as a feared giant, reclaiming shadowed empires. Nuclear fury destroys those dreams, erasing everything in a cataclysmic finality. Striking Ukraine erases the land and people he claims to save, obliterating territories in blinding light, populations vaporized in an instant. It drags NATO into direct war, soldiers deploying under urgent howls, alliances shattering like brittle ice. For Putin himself, disaster looms, NATO's swift retaliation or his own guards turning, bullets flying in betrayal to end his reign. International lifelines sever, China and India fleeing in horror, alliances dissolving like fog at dawn. He's ruthless, shrewd, but not insane. He knows nukes doom his throne, perhaps Russia entire. Yet external pressures rise, whispers from afar urging restraint. In the chill of international summits, backroom deals hint at unseen boundaries. At the G20 in Bali, November 2022, desperation gripped over Kherson's defenses, soldiers' boots stamping in mud, the damp earth yielding under siege. There, President Biden confronted Xi Jinping, intelligence revealing a stark warning: halt the nuclear threshold, or face isolation sting. China's stance mattered, a heavy anchor on Putin's wavering brink, pressuring a tyrant to reconsider his apocalyptic gamble. The war's bloody toll has left Russia's forces in retreat, echoing the frantic cries of soldiers abandoning positions around Kherson. Intelligence hints that Chinese President Xi Jinping warned Putin against nuclear strikes during a tense G20 summit in Bali in November 2022, as Russian troops grappled with defeat. So why hasn't Putin unleashed the apocalypse he threatens? Picture the commanding roar of engines fading into whispers of retreat, the acrid sting of gunpowder clinging to sweat-soaked uniforms, the gritty crunch of boots on frostbitten earth as generals plot in dimly lit bunkers. Is Putin's bluff crumbling under global pressure, or is there something more sinister at play? An unexpected twist reveals Beijing's iron grip on Russia's lifeline, with trade sanctions slashing oil and gas routes like a noose tightening around a gasping throat. Deep down, Putin knows nuclear fire would seal his regime's fate, a dramatic shift from bluster to undeniable doom. The metallic tang of fear fills the air, mingling with the hum of distant drones circling overhead. Unleash nukes, and China cuts ties, plunging Russia into utter economic abyss. Is this the crack in Putin's armor we've all been waiting for, exposing a leader feigning strength while whispering insane delusions? Who else might betray him if the missiles fly? Feel the weight of isolation pressing down, heavy as a warhead on fragile shoulders, as she protects Chinese interests. Why risk Taiwan's fate or shatter the global trade web China weaves? And let's pause. Motivated by conquest, not destruction, Putin's lust for Ukraine's lands, people, and riches clashes violently with the ravages of nuclear fallout. Imagine the hollow boom of a blast erasing fields you've fought to claim, the searing heat turning fertile soil to toxic waste, whole cities reduced to ghostly, uninhabitable voids. If ruin was his aim, why wait 4 brutal years? Each crossed red line proves it. He still chases a conventional win, underestimating Western resolve. What's the real cost of admitting defeat by annihilation? Yet, amid the chaos, his threats bear partial fruit, delaying aid like a slow poison seeping through Ukraine's veins. Germany hesitates on Taurus cruise missiles. The US stalls ATACMS deliveries for 20 grueling months. F-16s arrive late, dragged out by endless debates over risks. Can you fathom the bitter taste of caution, the grating delay that bleeds victory dry? Twisting again, this hesitation fuels escalations, but might it shatter Putin's facade entirely? What if one more delay exposes the emperor's naked deceit? The air thickens with anticipation, a storm brewing like thunder rumbling through evacuated streets. Imagine if Western nations had unleashed the powerful ATACMS, deployed F-16s, and launched long-range missiles back in mid-2022. Ukraine's counteroffensive could have unfolded entirely differently, more rapid, more decisive. Instead, Russian nuclear threats cast a shadow, slowing aid but not halting it entirely. Every time Putin brandished the threat of nuclear annihilation, it was like a shadow over the battlefield, darkening hopes, delaying progress. When Putin finally makes that fatal decision to use a nuclear weapon, 2 scenarios emerge. Either NATO responds with overwhelming force, and Russia faces utter ruin. Or, NATO falters, and the nuclear blackmail proves even more effective than anyone dared to imagine. Putin isn't risking his life on a gamble, he's betting on the power of intimidation, pushing threats that carry more weight than actual force. Each warning becomes a bargaining chip, a means to buy time and control the narrative. But this entire strategy rests on the assumption he remains rational. What if he doesn't? What if desperation pushes him beyond reason? What if the regime collapses, and nuclear escalation becomes the last act of a desperate leader seeking apocalyptic fame? History whispers warnings, like the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, nearly spiraling into catastrophe because of miscommunication and reckless brinkmanship. luck, more than skill, saved the world that day. Every threat Putin utters carries a dangerous undercurrent. The risk of miscalculation increases with each warning. A single overly aggressive move, an ill-timed response, could ignite a chain reaction, thrusting the world back to the brink of nuclear war. The more he bluffs, the more chances there are for a catastrophic error. It's like Russian roulette, played repeatedly, with the odds slowly stacking against everyone. Meanwhile, Putin's domestic situation weakens by the day. The Russian economy hemorrhages funds, oil and gas revenues plummet, dropping by 35% annually, while refining capacities shrink by 17% in mid-2025. His once mighty financial reserves are drying up. If his regime falters, and control crumbles beneath him, he might believe there's nothing left to lose. In that reckoning, nuclear weapons could suddenly seem like the ultimate escape, the final act, an attempt at everlasting infamy or destruction in a last desperate bid for survival. Could this be his final gamble? Or are we simply risking everything on a fragile, volatile game of power and fear? The clock is ticking, and each threat is a squeeze on the world's fragile balance, one mistake away from disaster. The war's outcome hinges on economies, supply chains, cutting-edge weapons, and unbreakable resolve. Russia falters in each. Viewers, you've seen the story unfold, a tale of bold threats and crumbling illusions. Now, picture this, as crumbling walls echo with distant artillery roars, the air thick with the metallic tang of spent gunpowder and the gritty dust of battlefield ruin, Putin clutches his fading cards. Does he dare flip the coin and unleash hell? You wonder, heart-pounding, if one slip could shatter the world. Imagine Ukraine armed with those F-16s and distant-striking missiles in summer 2022, smashing through defenses like a storm. The landscape might gleam with victory instead of shadows. In the shadow of a crumbling economy, Russia's oil rigs stand silent, their once roaring engines now sputtering under a 35% year-over-year revenue plunge. By mid-2025, refining capacity has shrunk by 17%. What if Putin's grip slips entirely? He might gamble everything on the world's most terrifying edge. Picture the tension in Oval Office air, thick with the metallic tang of unresolved threats. Trump's words cut through it like a thunderclap, dismissive, raw, echoing the hollow bluster of a man clinging to fading glory. But does this bold stance thrill or terrifying? Calling Putin's bluff feels liberating, yet could it trap him, forcing nuclear shadows to eclipse hope? Call it strategically risky. We must confront the farce without cornering the cornered. Ukraine deserves victory's embrace, yet soft paths remain for Russia's surrender, whispers of de-escalation in the chaos. Nuclear weapons loom as paradoxes, shields against their own fury. Deterrence thrives on mutual dread, that each side might unleash hell for key provocations. Break that belief? Declare eternal restraint, and you gamble away the shield. Hint at rash escalation over trifles, and instability erupts like wildfire. Putin dances this deadly tango. He craves Western fear, nukes as Ukraine's leash, whispers of regime-ending obliteration if unleashed. West counters by probing, gradual jabs at red lines, exposing their paper fragility. Howl over HIMARS artillery? Ships sail. Tanks thunder threats across borders? They arrive, unpunished. ATACMS missiles hum through skies? Strikes land. F-16 soar ominously? Each empty bellow diminishes his roar's force. Rhetorical hauntings fade into echoes. Beneath it all lies unpredictability's chill breath. Yet Putin clings, nuclear boasts his final dagger in a storm. West unshackles from paralysis. Trump scorn swells courage. Britain's resolve echoes, stealing aid. Germany's armories clang open anew. Europe's willing coalition pours forth, 40 billion euros, or $46 billion, in military might. Putin's nuclear shackles rust away. Ukraine's fate hinges on grittier battles, economics gritty grind, logistics heavy chains, tech's humming innovation, will's fiery pulse. Russia falters on every front, ground eroding beneath its boots. But what lurks in Putin's mind? A twist of desperation, a gamble too vast. If revenues bleed dry, rain teeters, will hubris ignite the apocalypse? Stay tuned, as cracks widen. In the shadows of crumbling empires, Russia grapples with the chokehold of economic collapse. Profits from oil and gas, fueling lavish excesses since the 2000s, now dwindle, a sharp 35% plunge in annual revenue, paired with a gut-punch 17% drop in refining power by mid-2025. As Vladimir Putin's grip slips, whispers of regime unraveling echo through the halls of power. What if desperation drives him to unthinkable extremes? Can you feel the tension crackling in the air, like static before a storm? Trump's brazen dismissal of Putin's boasts, his words slicing through the fog of fear, feels liberating, yet it's a double-edged sword. It exposes the emperor without clothes, humiliating Moscow's bluster in front of the world. But tread carefully, or you corner a cornered beast, forcing him to unleash the ultimate horror to save face. Imagine the cold sweat on palms as leaders weigh, support Ukraine's fight, yet leave paths open for Russia to climb down? The air thickens with unspoken dread. Nuclear weapons loom as paradox incarnate. Designed to paralyze by mere existence, their twisted dance hinges on mutual terror. Both sides must believe, a chilling certainty, that crossing certain lines ignites apocalypse. Convince your foe you'll never strike, and deterrence evaporates like mist in sunlight, leaving you vulnerable. Claim you'll obliterate over trifles, and chaos reigns, sparks flying into wildfire. Putin, the cunning manipulator, spins this web. He craves the West's terror of Russian nukes, stopping aid to Ukraine without dirtying his hands, because true use would shatter his throne in radioactive fury. A masterstroke? Or the gambler's gamble, his power teetering on razor wire? What unseen power turns these threats into paper tigers? The West, no longer cowering, unveils its gambit, probing Russia's red lines step by step, each cross a silent slap to credibility. HIMARS rocket systems arrive, their thunderous roars unpunished. Leopard tanks rumble forward, scents of diesel mingling with battlefield haze, unchallenged. Then come the atom strikes, precision humming through air like angry hornets, drawing only rhetorical fireworks. Finally, F-16 jets, F-16 fighters, soar in, their engines a defiant growl, yet no retaliation. Every threat meets hollow echo, etching humiliation deeper into Putin's facade. The unexpected twist? Red lines stretch elastic, snapping under weight of reality, leaving bluffs unraveled. As the curtain falls, Putin clings to his nuclear script, threats now his sole lifeline, predictable, fading murmurs. But the West awakens, unshackled. Trump's fury echoes like thunderclap, end the madness that should have lasted weeks. Britain's steel resolve surges, pouring support. Germany's arsenals hum with rearmament, metallic clanks filling the void. Europe's coalition unites, injecting 40 billion euros, or $46 billion, in a torrential flow of military might, drowning Russian blackmail in waves of solidarity. A shocking revelation unfolds. Are these empty words finally crumbling the Kremlin's walls? Ukraine's fate hangs not on bombs, but bedrock forces. Economics? Russia's coffers bleed dry. Logistics? Supply chains choke. Military tech? Outdated relics break under modern hammers. Political will? Diminishing like a dying flame. On every front, Moscow retreats, crashing waves against Ukrainian resolve. The scent of inevitable shift lingers, victory's whisper, or the world's sharpest pivot? Russia's slide accelerates, metrics screaming defeat. Numerical edges? Obliterated. Industrial roar? Fading echoes. Surprise? A ghost. 3 long years yield mere slivers of land, drenched in 1.4 million lives lost, a blood-soaked ledger of shattered might. Russian doctrine, that rigid framework of prescripted doom, crumbles against agile foes. Where NATO adapts, eyes gleaming with battlefield lessons, adversaries freeze in unchanging sclerosis. Officers paralyzed, tactics telegraphed, Ukrainian ingenuity exploits like wolves circling prey. From that catastrophic airport aerial first strike, hostile mail airfield engulfed in smoke and screams, To endless drone swarms buzzing death, the patterns of brutal tattoo, failure etched in fire. Economic collapse deepens the abyss. Funds vanishing, capacity eviscerated, Putin's desperation a palpable fog, choking ambitions. Might this be the twist, the regime's final gamble? War's grand rebalance unfolds, alliances forging anew in the forge of conflict. The world watches, pulse racing, will courage prevail, or does madness claim the final act?